Welcome to X Confessions Unlocked, where lies, betrayal, and truth collide. Kindly subscribe so you don't miss any of this. We share new stories daily. Stick around and unlock the drama. Now let's get into today's story. She showed up at my father's funeral in a black dress and red heels, on the arm of the man she cheated on me with. I hadn't seen either of them in months, and when I did, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked like she was walking a red carpet, not standing 10 feet away from the casket of the man who once called her his daughter. My name is Luke. I'm 37 now, and if you asked anyone in my life 5 years ago who I was, they'd probably say, dependable, quiet, nothing special. Steady job in IT, loved his family, married young, maybe a little too serious. My ex-wife, Melissa, used to joke that I was born 40 and forgot to have a wild phase. I didn't mind. I liked stability. I liked our quiet mornings, our dog, the grocery runs on Sunday. I thought that kind of peace meant we were winning. Melissa and I were together for 9 years, married for 6. We met at a mutual friend's engagement party. She was fire, bold, opinionated, sharp with her words, and she had this laugh that could fill a room. We weren't alike at all. She said I grounded her. I thought she made me feel alive. In the early years she was affectionate and supportive. But over time something shifted. I can't pinpoint the exact moment things started slipping, but it was death by 1,000 cuts. Sarcasm that cut deeper. Compliments that turned into comparisons. Eventually, her affection became conditional: do more, be more, impress her, or get out of the way. I think the worst part was that I believed her. She once told me during an argument, "You're just stuck. You're not going anywhere, Luke. It's like you're content with mediocrity." I don't want to wake up at 40 and still be married to someone who never took a risk. That one lodged itself somewhere in my chest. I didn't even fight back. I just nodded like maybe she had a point. Thing is, I was stuck, but not in the way she meant. I was stuck between trying to hold on to a marriage that felt like walking on eggshells and not knowing who I'd be without her. She was loud and exciting, and I'd built so much of my identity around being her calm, her constant. I didn't see that she had started resenting that very part of me. The affair, when I found out, wasn't even shocking. That's how far things had deteriorated. I was already sleeping on the couch more nights than not. She was staying out late under the guise of networking and needing space. When I saw the text between her and this guy, some entrepreneur she'd met through one of her wellness retreats, I just stared at them. Like I was reading someone else's story. They weren't even careful. The texts were full of hotel names, private jokes, and worse, talking about me like I was this sad, clueless accessory in her life. The confrontation was underwhelming. I asked her if she was in love with him. She shrugged. I don't know. But I feel alive around him. I haven't felt that with you in years. And just like that, the marriage ended. Quietly. She moved out. Took some furniture. Left the dog. I didn't fight her on anything. I didn't have the strength. I just shut down and went numb. A few friends tried to be there for me, but I wasn't ready to talk. I buried myself in work. Ate meals standing over the sink. Answered every, "How are you?" with hanging in. Then came the real punch to the gut. My father, my biggest supporter, the man who taught me to fix a car and throw a punch and never raise my voice out of anger, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. 6 months later he was gone. The grief was blinding. My mom fell apart. My sister was out of the country. So I handled everything: hospital visits, paperwork, arranging the funeral. I didn't invite Melissa. She knew. I was sure someone told her. She showed up anyway. And she brought him. The two of them walked in holding hands. Like they were arriving at a brunch, not a funeral. My mother gasped when she saw them. I was standing near the entrance of the church, greeting some extended family, and my stomach dropped. I honestly thought it was a hallucination at first. She didn't even flinch. Just smiled politely and said, "I'm sorry for your loss." I looked at her. Then at him. He had that smug, aloof look that some guys get when they're used to winning without effort. He offered his hand to me. I didn't take it. All I said was, "You shouldn't be here." Her face didn't change. "He loved me too," she said. "No. He tolerated you because I loved you." That's what I wanted to say. But I didn't. I just turned and walked away. The funeral was a blur after that. People kept whispering. I saw heads turning. My mom asked me quietly why Melissa would do something so cruel. I didn't have an answer. That night I didn't cry. I didn't punch a wall. I didn't even drink. I just sat in my car outside my apartment for an hour, staring at the steering wheel. And that's when the real shift happened. I realized how much space she still took up in my life, even after betraying me, leaving me, humiliating me. She could still ruin one of the most sacred days of my life by walking into a room. I was done letting her have that power. The next morning I called in sick for the first time in years. Not because I needed rest, but because I needed a plan. I couldn't keep being the guy life happened to. I needed to become the guy who made things happen. It didn't happen overnight. In fact, it was brutally slow. I started by seeing a therapist. I had to dig through layers of shame, doubt, and sadness that had calcified over the years. I realized how much I dimmed myself to fit Melissa's expectations. How I let myself become small to keep the peace. Then I quit my job. Not impulsively, I'd been sitting on an idea for years. A software tool I'd built for internal use that helped streamline workflows for small remote teams. Boring to most, but elegant and effective. I reworked it, got a basic version off the ground, and started pitching it to clients on weekends. Just a side hustle at first. Something that reminded me I still had sharp edges. That I could build things. Months passed. I started lifting weights again. Reconnected with my sister. Traveled solo for the first time, Scotland, because my dad always wanted to go. I left a pebble from his collection on a quiet hill outside Inverness. And my software tool? It caught on. Slowly, then all at once. A niche YouTuber featured it in a tools I use daily video. Traffic exploded. I got overwhelmed with inquiries, hired 2 part-time devs, turned it into an LLC, and signed my first corporate client within a year. My apartment changed. My posture changed. My voice changed. And that's when I got the message. A DM from Melissa. Just said, "Hey, I saw your interview on LinkedIn. Congrats on everything. Would love to catch up sometime. I was wrong about a lot of things. Hope you're well." I stared at it for a long time. Of course she saw the interview. It had been shared in some local entrepreneurial circles. Me talking about resilience, loss, and the drive to create something meaningful after grief. I didn't mention her by name, but I spoke the truth. She wanted back in. Not in a romantic way maybe. But in that way some people do, when they realize they underestimated you. When they want to tether themselves to your glow. I didn't reply. Not immediately. And when I did, it was only this. "Thanks. I hope you're doing well too." That was it. No meeting. No rehashing. No closure conversation. Just peace. Because I didn't need anything else from her. Not an apology. Not praise. Not regret. I already had what I needed. A life that felt entirely mine. Melissa didn't reply to my message. Or maybe she did and I just never saw it. I archived the chat right after sending that one-line response. It felt clean, final. No open door. No resentment either. Just, done. I'm not going to pretend I never thought about her after that. She'd been a massive part of my life. You don't delete someone from your system overnight. But something had shifted after the funeral. That moment, her walking in with him on her arm at one of the lowest points in my life, flipped a switch I didn't know I had. It made me realize that sometimes the most self-respecting thing you can do isn't to retaliate. It's to move forward without looking back. I kept building. The software company, which I had casually named Flowline, thinking at the time it was just a placeholder, took on a life of its own. We grew faster than expected. By the second year, I had 5 full-time employees and we were getting interest from mid-size firms that wanted custom versions. It was more responsibility than I'd ever carried and I thrived in it. I had purpose again. Structure, yes, but this time with momentum. That first year after the funeral, I lived quietly. I didn't post about my work much. I wasn't dating. I was rebuilding not just my life but myself. A lot of people mistake that silence for loneliness. But I was anything but lonely. There's something powerful about pouring your pain into something that grows. I eventually did start dating again, but slowly, carefully. I wasn't bitter, I just had boundaries I'd never had before. I knew the red flags now. Not the obvious ones like lying or cheating, but the subtle ones. Disrespect masked as jokes, affection only when convenient, the kind of love that needs you to shrink so the other person can shine brighter. It was about 18 months post-divorce when I ran into someone who mentioned Melissa again. I hadn't heard her name in nearly a year. I was at a friend's wedding. A quiet outdoor thing, lots of white chairs and fairy lights strung across trees. During the cocktail hour, a mutual acquaintance, Jen, walked up to me with a grin. "You know, I ran into Melissa a couple weeks ago," she said casually, sipping her drink. "She asked about you." I blinked. "Oh. Yeah," she laughed. Said she saw you on some 30 under 40-foot list and almost choked on her latte. I gave a small smile. "That's dramatic." She was being weirdly nostalgic. Asking if you were seeing anyone. I think she regrets everything, to be honest. I didn't answer that. I just nodded and went to get another drink. The truth is, I didn't care whether she regretted it or not. Her regret, if it existed, wasn't my responsibility. That's something I learned the hard way. I used to think I could change how someone saw me by becoming more, better, stronger. But people see what they want. If they need to paint you as the problem so they can justify leaving, they will. Still, curiosity is human. A week later, I found myself typing her name into Instagram. Her profile was still public. I hadn't looked at it since the split. She'd cut her hair short. The guy she cheated on me with wasn't in any recent photos. Lots of solo shots. Long captions about growth and redefining self-love. One photo caught my eye, a black and white selfie in a mirror with a caption that read, "Healing isn't linear, but I'm learning to sit with the silence." I'm not going to lie, part of me wondered what her silence felt like. It was heavy. If she ever thought about that funeral, about how she'd showed up with him, about how she might have misread the moment so badly that she turned it into her own stage. But that was just a passing thought. Because soon after that, she messaged me again. This time it was longer. "I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe I've just been doing a lot of thinking. That funeral, I shouldn't have come. At least not like that. I thought I was proving something, maybe that I was okay or right or ahead. But I was selfish. And I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. You were always better to me than I was to you. I just didn't know how to be still. Or how to love someone steady when I was so used to chaos. I hope you can forgive me someday." I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and didn't answer for a full day. Not because I was angry. Because I wanted to be sure I wasn't replying out of some leftover emotional obligation. That I wasn't slipping back into a version of myself that needed her approval. When I finally wrote back, it was short. Not cold, not cruel, just real. "Thank you for saying that. I've made peace with the past. I hope you find what you're looking for." She heart reacted it. And that was the last I ever heard from her. But that message told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't trying to come back out of love. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of herself that felt safe when she was with me. And that's not the same thing. A few months later, something happened that, I won't lie, felt like full circle vindication. I was invited to speak at a regional tech conference. Nothing massive, but a good crowd. Investors, founders, young devs hungry for direction. My talk was about failure and reinvention. I told the story of my first attempt to build a company that flopped, about losing my dad, about the pain that can either drown you or light a fire under you. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. It wasn't about her. But someone must have told her about the talk. Because 2 weeks later I got an email. From melissa.writerslife@gmail.com. Subject: Would you be open to being interviewed? Hi Luke. I'm writing an article series about growth after divorce and personal transformation. I think your story could really inspire people. If you're open to it, I'd love to interview you for a feature piece I'm pitching to Medium. Totally understand if not. Just thought I'd ask. That one I didn't respond to at all. It wasn't personal. It was just, not my story anymore. At least, not in a way I was willing to hand over to her to reshape. That was the last time I heard from her. Since then life has been good. Not in the flashy, look at me now kind of way. But in the kind of way where mornings are peaceful, the people around me are kind, and I don't feel like I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I've learned that not all exes are monsters. Some are just lost. Some are chasing validation so hard they don't see who they trample. Some are doing their best even when their best hurts you. Melissa was never pure evil. She was impulsive, self-involved. But I think she did love me, in the way a person can love someone who never challenges their self-perception. I just stopped fitting into her story, so she wrote me out of it. But I didn't disappear. I became the author of my own. Grief has a strange way of clarifying what matters. Losing my dad forced me to reevaluate everything, how I spent my time, who I gave energy to, what I allowed to define me. For the longest time, I had made Melissa the center of my emotional world. Even in her absence, she lingered like a shadow, an echo of all the things I once thought I needed to be. But in the years that followed the divorce, I started living with a sense of intention that I never had before. Not out of bitterness or revenge, but because I had something to build, for me this time. Melissa's final message, the request to interview me, was oddly symbolic. She had once dismissed my ambitions as pipe dreams. Called my jobs safe, my hobbies dull, my dreams too small. And yet, when it finally mattered, she wanted access to the story I had written without her. And I had to protect it. The day I got that email from her, asking to interview me for her article series, I remember sitting in my home office, the one I'd turned into a cozy, functional studio space. Sunlight filtered through the windows and my dog, Ollie, still the same beagle mix she left behind, was snoring on the rug by my feet. Everything was calm, peaceful. Mine. I hovered over the keyboard for a second, tempted to respond. Not out of interest, but out of habit. I had spent so many years responding to Melissa, jumping at her words, anticipating her moods, filtering my reactions through her expectations. But that part of me had been retired like an old coat that no longer fit. So I closed the tab, blocked the email. I didn't need to be a footnote in her reinvention. The strange thing about healing is that it rarely feels like a grand moment of arrival. There's no soundtrack, no fireworks. It happens in quiet decisions, boundaries, late-night reflections that don't spiral into shame anymore. Healing looks like making dinner while humming to a song you forgot you loved. Like laughing, really laughing, at a joke and realizing you didn't think about your past once that day. Somewhere in the 3rd year after the divorce, I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. We met at a business development workshop, of all places. She was a project lead for a nonprofit tech initiative and, unlike Melissa, didn't care for pretense. She asked thoughtful questions. She listened with her full attention. She had this calm strength about her, like someone who had fallen and rebuilt, too. We didn't rush anything. We took long walks, had quiet dinners. She never made me feel like I had to perform. I didn't have to shrink or stretch myself to fit her idea of who I should be. I told her about Melissa eventually. Not the dramatic version, just the facts. She didn't react with jealousy or judgment. Just nodded and said, "Sounds like you've done a lot of work to get to where you are now." That's all I needed to hear. We didn't post much online. I wasn't into broadcasting my private life anymore. But that didn't mean people weren't watching. A few mutual acquaintances had started reaching out, noticing my growth, asking for advice, or just reconnecting. Word travels. Especially when your success no longer fits the narrative others had written about you. One day my sister forwarded me a screenshot. It was a tweet from Melissa's account. Sometimes you don't realize the best people you had were the ones you pushed away because you didn't know how to receive love that didn't come with drama. No names. No tags. Just floating in the void. I didn't react. Didn't message. Didn't need to. Because here's what I know now. Regret isn't always an apology. And an apology isn't always redemption. Melissa wanted closure on her own timeline. But I had already buried that chapter. She brought a man to my father's funeral, a man she had betrayed me with, and then wanted to re-enter my world when it was glowing. That wasn't growth. That was ego dressed up as introspection. Meanwhile, I had spent those years investing. Not just in business but in friendships, family, and myself. My relationship with my mother had deepened. We shared weekly Sunday dinners, a new ritual that had emerged from our shared grief. My sister eventually moved back to town and joined the Flowline team as operations lead. She was sharp, honest, and kept me grounded. I started mentoring young developers through a local boot camp. Telling my story became less about catharsis and more about service. If some 26-year-old kid could hear about how I got blindsided by betrayal and still built something that mattered, maybe they'd take one less detour into self-doubt. And the best part? I wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone, especially not to Melissa. That was the final step in my healing, realizing that success wasn't about being seen. It was about being aligned with who I was, what I valued, how I treated people. I no longer needed someone to clap for me in the crowd. I had become my own applause. But life has a way of circling back even when you don't ask it to. I got a call one afternoon from an old mutual friend, Darren, who I hadn't spoken to in ages. He sounded hesitant. "Hey man, weird question. Melissa's speaking at this panel I'm moderating next month. It's about transformation and growth post-divorce. She mentioned you briefly in the prep call. Not by name, but I knew she meant you." I leaned back in my chair. "Okay." She said you inspired her to look inward, and that watching you build something out of grief made her realize how much damage she'd done back then. I didn't say anything. I could hear Darren shifting on the other end. "I just figured you should know. It wasn't malicious or anything, but it sounded like, I don't know, like she's trying to make peace with the past. In public." I exhaled slowly. "That's her right." There was a pause. "You okay with that?" "Yeah," I said. And I meant it. She can tell her story. I know mine. And here's mine. I was once someone who believed love meant sacrificing yourself for someone else's vision. That being steady made you small. That rejection meant you were unworthy. Now I know better. I know love doesn't ask you to disappear. That being steady is a strength. That rejection is sometimes just redirection. I've rebuilt not just a life, but a self. One that doesn't hinge on validation from people who couldn't see me clearly the first time around. And when Melissa finally looked back and saw the man she had underestimated, not with envy or lust or nostalgia, but with a kind of distant reverence, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. There's a particular kind of peace that comes when you stop needing closure from someone who once shattered you. When you realize that silence can be more powerful than any well-rehearsed goodbye. That was the space I finally reached. Not bitter, not vengeful, just clear. Melissa's public attempts to rewrite her narrative didn't bother me. Not anymore. If anything, they made sense. People don't want to be the villain in their own stories. And if painting me as her moral compass helped her feel less haunted by her own choices, that was fine. I wasn't going to interfere. I'd already closed that chapter with a period, not a comma. It wasn't long after Darren's call that Rachel and I decided to move in together. It wasn't dramatic or overly romantic, it just fit. One morning over coffee we looked around my place and then hers and realized we were already spending most of our nights together. We were sharing groceries, books, and long silences that never felt empty. That kind of intimacy sneaks up on you. It's not fireworks, it's a steady flame. The day she moved in, I found a box of my old things in the back of my closet. Stuff from my marriage. An old photo album. A dusty Christmas ornament with our initials. A couple of letters Melissa had written me, back when she still wrote things by hand. I sat with that box for a while. Not in sadness, not in nostalgia, just with a kind of curiosity. Like looking at a stranger's life. I didn't throw it out. I didn't need to. I put it back in the closet, out of sight, where it belonged. One of the biggest lies people tell you after heartbreak is that you need to burn everything down to start over. But sometimes, healing is about keeping the past in the attic, not erasing it, just refusing to carry it around like it still belongs in your living room. Things with Flowline had taken off by then. We landed a contract with a national education company, customizing software for remote learning. It was the kind of deal that changed everything. Revenue, staff size, industry recognition. I was suddenly being invited to speak at events, not because I had something flashy, but because I'd built something solid. At one of these conferences, I met someone who used to work with Melissa, back when she was still chasing freelance journalism gigs in the city. Her name was Tara, and she was one of the panelists alongside me. After the event, she pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I just realized I know your ex-wife." "Oh," I said, sipping my water. "Yeah, Melissa. I interned at a publication she wrote for a few years back. She used to mention you all the time, though I think she underestimated you." That made me laugh. That was a bit of a theme, yeah. "Well," she said, grinning, "she sure talks about you differently now." I smiled politely and changed the subject. That was the thing, I wasn't interested in who I was to her anymore. The version of me that lived in Melissa's head was no longer my concern. One Saturday morning months later, I got a call from an unknown number. I wouldn't usually answer, but I was expecting a delivery and thought it might be the driver. Instead, it was her. Melissa. Her voice was familiar in a way that felt foreign, like hearing an old song you no longer have on any playlist. "Hey," she said. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick up." "I usually don't," I replied honestly. She let out a nervous laugh. "I get that. I won't take up much of your time, I just wanted to say something directly without filters." I stayed quiet. Not encouraging, not shutting her down. Just listening. "I saw the interview you did with Wired," she continued. "The piece about turning grief into growth. I read it 3 times. And it kind of wrecked me. In a good way, I think." "Okay," I said, neutral. "I guess I realized how much I never saw you. Or rather, I saw you through the lens of who I needed you to be. Stable. Predictable. Safe. I think I resented you for not being more volatile, which is insane, right?" "It's not insane," I said. "It's just sad." She paused. "Yeah, it is." There was a long silence and then she said, "I know it's not my place, but I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Genuinely. You deserve to be seen." "Thanks," I said and meant it. Another pause. "Anyway, I'm moving. Probably overseas. New start and all that. I just didn't want to go without saying this." I nodded to myself. "I appreciate that, Melissa. I really do. I hope you find what you're looking for." She let out a slow breath. "Take care, Luke." "You too." And that was the last time we ever spoke. After that call, I didn't spiral. I didn't revisit old wounds. I just stood on the balcony of the apartment Rachel and I now shared, holding a mug of coffee and watching the early morning sun bleed into the sky. That conversation didn't change anything. But it clarified something. Melissa didn't call because she loved me. She called because she finally saw what she lost. not as a partner, but as a version of herself she couldn't quite match again. And in doing so, she gave me the last piece I didn't even know I needed. The quiet proof that I had outgrown the story she once wrote me into. These days I don't define myself by my past. But I don't pretend it didn't happen either. I am the man whose ex-wife brought her affair partner to his father's funeral. And I am the man who built a business from grief, who fell in love again without losing himself, who learned how to stand in his own worth without shouting for attention. I didn't need to slam a door. I just walked through a better one. And I'm not looking back.